Pope Francis is undoubtedly one of the most influential and well-loved figures today. Known for his down-to-earth nature, compassion, and dedication to global peace, he's blessed countless churches around the world, becoming a symbol of faith and unity. So, when the Notre Dame Cathedral, a true masterpiece of history and devotion, finally reopened after years of restoration, everyone expected him to be there. But to everyone's surprise, he wasn't. Rumors started flying until Pope Francis himself revealed something that truly shocked the world. Let's dive into what he said and take a look at the journey that brought him here. Before we get to the latest news about Pope Francis and the Bombshell revelation, let's take a step back and explore who this man really is and why he's such an important figure today. From humble beginnings in Argentina to becoming the head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis's life is a remarkable story of faith, perseverance, and compassion. Let's rewind a bit to where it all started. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who would later become Pope Francis, was born on December 17, 1936, in the Flores neighborhood of Buenos Aires, Argentina. As the eldest of 5 children, Jorge was raised by Mario José Bergoglio, an Italian immigrant accountant, and Regina Marori, a homemaker with northern Italian roots. The Bergoglio family had fled Italy in 1929 to escape Mussolini's regime, not because of economic hardship, but in search of freedom and a fresh start. Growing up in a busy, tight-knit family shaped Jorge's values: humility, hard work, and a love for community. As a child, Jorge was pretty much like any other kid. He played football on the streets, spent time with his family, and went to school. But there was already something special about him. At the Wilfrido Barón de los Santos Angeles School in Ramos Mejia, Jorge started to develop a sense of discipline and spirituality. Although he had no idea at that time what was ahead for him, his path began to take shape. He later attended Escuela Técnica Industrial in 27, where he studied chemistry. Yep, believe it or not, the Pope has a science background. Jorge even got a diploma as a chemical technician and spent some time working in a food lab. Hard to imagine him in a lab coat, right? But he was also a young man trying to figure things out, taking odd jobs like being a janitor and even working as a bouncer at a bar. However, life took a dramatic turn when Jorge was 21. After battling a life-threatening bout of pneumonia and having 3 cysts removed, he lost part of one of his lungs. This was a wake-up call, forcing him to slow down and think about life. Around the same time, something happened that would change his life forever. On his way to celebrate Spring Day with friends, Jorge stopped by a church to confess. That visit sparked something inside him, a calling to serve the church. From that moment on, his life was no longer about chemicals or odd jobs, but about faith and helping others. In 1958, Jorge joined the Society of Jesus, becoming a Jesuit novice. His training took him from Argentina to Santiago, Chile, where he studied humanities, and later back to Buenos Aires for philosophy. And so, his journey truly began. Even Pope Francis had his moments of doubt. He even admitted to having a crush on a girl at one point. He's human after all. But despite those fleeting thoughts, Jorge stuck to his path. He took his first vows as a Jesuit in 1960 and began teaching literature and psychology at high schools. Imagine having a future pope as your teacher. By 1969, after years of study, Jorge was ordained as a priest, ready to take on even bigger roles in the church. His journey within the Jesuits moved quickly, and by 1973, he took his final vows and was appointed provincial superior of the Jesuits in Argentina. During his 6 years in that role, Jorge focused on pastoral work, always keeping a close connection with the people. Despite some tension within the Jesuit community, not everyone agreed with his approach, but his dedication to his faith never wavered. After serving as rector at the Philosophical and Theological Faculty in San Miguel, Jorge's role within the church kept growing. His humility and dedication didn't go unnoticed. In 1992, he was appointed Auxiliary Bishop of Buenos Aires, and by 1998, he became the city's Archbishop. It was here that Jorge earned the nickname the Slum Bishop. While others might have avoided the poorest areas, he moved right into them, increasing the number of priests in the slums, washing the feet of the marginalized, visiting hospitals, and walking alongside those who had been forgotten by society. In 2001, Pope John Paul II made him a cardinal, boosting his global recognition. Jorge's simple lifestyle, humility, and commitment to social justice made him stand out. He didn't live in lavish residences, cooked his own meals, and even took the bus to work. Even in Rome, he was known for his low profile and quick visits, refusing to bask in the spotlight. Then came 2013, when Pope Benedict XVI resigned, leaving the world in shock. The cardinals gathered to elect a new pope, and to everyone's surprise, they chose Jorge Mario Bergoglio, who took the name Pope Francis. The humble man from Argentina became the first Jesuit pope, the first pope from the Americas, and the first non-European pope in over 1,200 years. From day one, Pope Francis signaled a new era, one focused on simplicity, compassion, and reform. When he became pope at 76, he stepped onto the world stage with a smile, a simple wave, and a heart full of service. But what truly makes Pope Francis such a remarkable and important figure today isn't just his role, it's the way he lives it. Right after his election, he broke from tradition by skipping the papal car and riding the bus with the other cardinals back to their hotel. The next day, he quietly visited a sick friend in the hospital. No fanfare, no red carpets, just Francis being Francis. One of his first decisions was to choose the name Francis in honor of Saint Francis of Assisi, a saint known for his devotion to the poor and love for nature. Pope Francis later shared that during the conclave, a fellow cardinal whispered to him, "Don't forget the poor." That moment stuck with him, and it became his guiding principle. He wanted a church for the poor, run by the poor. Over the past decade, he's been living up to that call. As we've already mentioned, Pope Francis is all about breaking new ground. He's the first pope from the Americas, the first Jesuit pope, and the first one to live outside the traditional papal apartments. Instead, he chose to stay in the Vatican's guest house, sharing meals and conversations with visitors. He made it clear that being pope isn't about luxury or status, it's about service. His leadership is focused on mercy, compassion, and inclusivity. In 2015, he declared a year of mercy, urging Catholics around the world to focus on forgiveness and kindness. He also opened special doors of mercy in churches worldwide, symbolizing God's open arms to all people. Pope Francis redefined what it means to be close to the people. He's known for embracing everyone, from the sick and poor to the elderly, and those on the margins of society. He famously washed the feet of prisoners, including women and Muslims, during the Holy Thursday ritual. For him, no one is too small to deserve love and dignity. As a Jesuit, Pope Francis brought the Jesuit tradition of discernment, listening for God's call, into his papacy in a way that continues to shape his leadership. One of the core elements of Jesuit spirituality is the idea of serving others with humility and attentiveness. Pope Francis often speaks about the importance of focusing on serving the people around us rather than getting bogged down by the rigidity of rules or formalities. His famous line, "Pastors must have the smell of the sheep," serves as a vivid reminder for clergy to stay close to the people they serve, to truly understand their struggles, and to be present with them in their everyday lives. This sentiment encapsulates his approach to leadership, a leadership grounded in service, connection, and understanding. Pope Francis has also worked tirelessly to modernize the Church, focusing not only on spiritual matters, but also on the organization itself. He's been instrumental in reforming Vatican financial practices, cleaning up financial mismanagement, and promoting greater transparency. He also advocates for a more inclusive approach to church decisions, encouraging more voices to be heard and ensuring that the Church is not just a place of dogmatic authority, but a community of shared responsibility and mutual care. This approach is rooted in collaboration and renewal, with the aim of building a church that reflects the values of justice, compassion, and integrity. One of his first steps in this direction was the creation of a council of cardinals to advise him on matters of church governance, and he brought in experts to tackle long-standing issues such as accountability, particularly within the Vatican's financial system. On a global scale, Pope Francis has used his position to advocate for peace, the protection of the environment, and solidarity with the poor. His travels have taken him to places no pope has visited before, such as Iraq, where he offered hope and support to the Christian communities struggling to survive in the midst of conflict. His visits to areas suffering from war, poverty, and environmental crises serve as both a symbol of unity and a call for tangible action. Whether addressing environmental degradation, advocating for peace in the Middle East, or standing up for marginalized communities, Pope Francis's message has always been consistent. Love, mercy, and humility are the foundations of our shared humanity. What truly makes Pope Francis beloved across the globe is his remarkable ability to connect with ordinary people. Whether he's chatting with crowds in St. Peter's Square, engaging in meaningful dialogue, or writing heartfelt letters to people in need, he brings a personal touch to his role. His interactions are never about elevating his own status or creating a divide between himself and the people. Instead, he makes it clear that being a true leader isn't about wielding power. It's about serving others with genuine care and compassion. He leads not by dictating, but by example, showing the world that true leadership involves humility, empathy, and a commitment to justice. So, why do so many people around the world love Pope Francis? It boils down to one fundamental truth. He reminds us of the goodness in humanity. Whether through his words or actions, Pope Francis teaches us that kindness, charity, and humanity aren't just nice ideas. They are responsibilities we all share. Since becoming Pope in 2013, he's made charity a cornerstone of his papacy. For him, charity isn't just about occasional acts of generosity. It's a way of life, a continual call to action that embodies the essence of faith. He constantly reminds us that faith without action is empty, and he leads by example, always putting compassion into practice, whether it's through his charitable efforts or his outreach to the most vulnerable in society. One of Pope Francis's most powerful statements speaks to the idea that a Christian faith which doesn't challenge the powerful or inspire a deep commitment to charity risks becoming nothing more than a harmless form of devotion. In other words, he insists that faith must lead to real, tangible change in the world, and that challenge often means standing up to injustice and inequality. Pope Francis's humanitarian work, both in thought and action, reflects this belief. His efforts after the devastating earthquakes shook Turkey and Syria are a testament to this commitment. The Pope didn't simply offer prayers. He sent real help. Aid supplies, financial support, and the coordinated efforts of organizations like the Rava Foundation were dispatched to refugee camps in desperate need of assistance. Whether it's food, medicine, or shelter, Pope Francis believes in charity that is practical, immediate, and impactful. Charity that reaches those who need it most in their time of crisis. This is the kind of leadership Pope Francis has embodied throughout his papacy, one that calls on the global community to act, to serve, and to uplift the most vulnerable among us. His dedication to Ukraine is another powerful example. Long before the recent conflict, Pope Francis was deeply concerned about the suffering there. In 2016, he personally donated $6 million to provide not just food and clothing, but also medical care and therapy. For him, charity isn't just about meeting immediate needs. It's about helping people heal, rebuild, and regain their dignity. But Pope Francis doesn't just leave this work to big organizations. He actively supports and uplifts smaller groups that share his vision. He praises organizations like Cardinal International, which operates in over 200 countries, and the University College for Aspiring Missionary Doctors, which sends doctors to underserved hospitals in Africa. These groups may not always make the headlines, but their work changes lives, and Pope Francis makes sure they know how valuable they are. Even in his own home continent of South America, Francis has inspired countless initiatives to combat poverty, homelessness, and inequality. During the World Day of the Poor, he reminded the Church that serving the poor isn't optional. In a powerful homily, Pope Francis emphasized that the Church truly embodies the teachings of Jesus when it serves the poor. This really sums up Pope Francis, a man who believes that helping the most vulnerable is the heart of Christianity. One of his most innovative charity projects focuses on children, whom he calls the seeds of the future. His global network for children aims to create centers of medical excellence to provide care for young people in underserved areas. It's a beautiful reminder that while some illnesses may be incurable, no child should ever be seen as incurable in the eyes of love. What truly sets Pope Francis apart is his ability to pair grand ideas with small personal touches. He shares meals with the poor, embraces the sick, and encourages others to do the same. During one World Day of the Poor, he personally shared lunch with 300 struggling people. It's such a simple act, yet so profound. Pope Francis reminds us that even the smallest acts of love can change the world. And in a time when the world feels divided and uncertain, that's exactly the kind of leader we need. His journey of peace and compassion has taken him far and wide, and it's clear that he's never one to stay quietly behind the Vatican walls. Since becoming Pope in 2013, he's been on the move, visiting countries across the globe to spread messages of hope, peace, and interfaith dialogue. His travels are never about ceremony or show. They're heartfelt and always focused on bringing people together during some of the most challenging times in our modern world. 2024 has been a particularly busy year for Pope Francis, perhaps the busiest of his papacy, and his international visits have gained even more significance. Let's take a step back and remember how it all started. One of Pope Francis's first iconic trips was to Brazil in 2013 for World Youth Day. Imagine this. 3.5 million pilgrims gathered on Copacabana Beach, listening to the new pope call them to live full, meaningful lives. He urged young people not to be part-time Christians, sparking a fire of faith that spread far beyond the shores of Rio de Janeiro. That trip set the tone for his global mission. A pope who wouldn't hide behind tradition but would travel the world to stand with people wherever they were. From there, Pope Francis's passport quickly filled up. He visited conflict zones, historical regions, and the forgotten corners of the world, always delivering a message of unity and healing. In 2014, his powerful visit to the Holy Land had him praying at the West Bank barrier and meeting with religious leaders, including Patriarch Bartholomew. It wasn't just a religious tour, it was a deliberate call for dialogue and peace in a region long torn by conflict. That same year, he headed to South Korea, where he beatified 124 Korean martyrs in front of 800,000 people, showing his ability to bring people together in faith, no matter how divided the region might be. Pope Francis's global influence hasn't been limited to the Christian world. Time and again, he's shown his willingness to bridge the gaps between different faiths. Whether addressing the European Parliament in 2014 or celebrating one of the largest papal masses in history in the Philippines in 2015, with a staggering 7 million attendees, his travels have always blended spiritual leadership with global diplomacy. Fast forward to 2024, and it's like Pope Francis has kicked things into overdrive. This year alone, he's embarked on a whirlwind of international visits, each one carefully planned to address some of the most pressing global issues: religious harmony, social justice, and peace. His agenda has been relentless, but his message has remained just as clear. The highlight of the year was undoubtedly his ambitious Southeast Asia and Oceania tour in September. His first stop? Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim-majority country. There, in an extraordinary moment of interfaith cooperation, Pope Francis and Grand Imam Nasaruddin Umar signed the Joint Declaration of Istanbul 2024, a document focused on promoting religious harmony and addressing humanitarian and environmental crises. Pope Francis's message is simple yet profound. Different faiths can and must work together to heal the world. His travels in 2024 have highlighted this idea in the most powerful ways. After Indonesia, where he helped foster interfaith cooperation and signed a crucial declaration on religious harmony, Francis continued his journey with a mission to spread peace. In Papua New Guinea, his message wasn't just about peace, it was about ending tribal violence that had long affected local communities. His visit brought humanitarian aid and, more importantly, hope to a region in dire need of both. Next, he made his way to East Timor, a country where Catholicism runs deep, and celebrated Mass for an astonishing 600,000 people, nearly half of the country's entire population. This event was a moment of healing, reconciliation, and encouragement for a nation still recovering from its troubled past. In Singapore, Francis spoke to the younger generation, urging them to embrace interfaith dialogue as a key tool in building a more peaceful future. But Pope Francis wasn't done yet. Later in the year, he visited Luxembourg, a small yet powerful nation known for its focus on economic justice. There, he called on wealthy nations to take more responsibility in helping the world's poorest. And in December, he made history by being the first pope ever to visit Corsica. His message there was about finding balance between secular and religious values, promoting a model of dynamic secularity where faith and civic life work together in harmony. So why are these visits so important? Because Pope Francis knows that change doesn't happen with words alone. By physically traveling to places like war-torn villages, busy city squares, or struggling slums, he shows up in solidarity with the people. He reminds world leaders of their responsibilities and encourages everyday citizens to take action. His presence shines a spotlight on the forgotten, the overlooked, and the marginalized, making sure their voices are heard. But not all of Pope Francis's visits went exactly as planned. Take his trip to Paris, for instance. It was meant to be a major, eagerly anticipated event, both for the Vatican and the French public. But just as everything seemed to fall into place, chaos erupted. We'll get into that later, though. Beyond these significant journeys, Pope Francis has become a central figure at some of the most important church openings and dedications around the world. Whether it's inaugurating a newly restored basilica, blessing a humble chapel in a far-flung village, or showing solidarity at churches rebuilt after war or disaster, his presence always carries profound meaning. He doesn't just show up, he leaves a lasting impression. Take the restoration of the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome, for example. When this iconic church underwent major renovations, it was only fitting that Pope Francis led the Jubilee celebrations. His presence was a reminder that the beauty of faith often comes through the preservation and renewal of the church itself. Pope Francis's absence from the grand reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris is a moment that has sparked much speculation and intrigue. Given his usual presence at key religious milestones, the decision to skip such a historic event, especially one like Notre Dame, a symbol of faith and resilience for millions, raises several important questions. Pope Francis has long emphasized that the strength of the church lies not in grand buildings, but in its people and their faith. His words about telling everything suggest that his absence was not about disregard, but rather about reaffirming his message of humility and service. The Pope has consistently focused on the marginalized, the poor, and those who often feel forgotten, so it's possible that he chose to be elsewhere to serve these communities or address other urgent needs in a world that is still reeling from crises and inequalities. In his usual style, Pope Francis often subverts expectations to make a point, showing that faith is not bound by tradition or ceremony. The Church's true strength, as he might see it, is in how it uplifts and supports the people. Notre Dame's reopening may have been a significant moment, but perhaps he felt that the real message of faith, renewal, rebuilding, and hope could be better represented through the people who embody those values every day, rather than through the symbolic restoration of a building. The French public's reaction of confusion and disappointment is understandable, as many likely saw Pope Francis's presence at Notre Dame as a spiritual affirmation of the Church's resilience and renewal. However, in typical Pope Francis fashion, his absence speaks volumes about his values, prioritizing people over monuments, the forgotten over the celebrated, and the service of others over grand ceremonies. Whatever the deeper reason behind his decision, it's clear that Pope Francis's actions often have a purpose beyond the surface, and his absence at Notre Dame may well be a part of a larger message he seeks to convey about the nature of faith, humility, and the Church's true role in the world.